Jung at Harp. Today we are going to talk about freedom and regression. My name is Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm a composer and a performer, and I'm here with Kathleen Wiley, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst. And each week, sort of, we talk about subjects that are interesting to us and parse them out each in our own way. Kathleen talks about Jungian analysis, and I talk about the strings of passion, the creative resonance, the principles of how creativity works. And we're both really talking about creativity. And freedom and fear are two big parts of creative expression. And I started out today saying that I woke up in the midst of this like kind of old resentment that kind of comes up sometimes, and most of the time it's gone. And I realize that often when I'm feeling this sort of like almost like a relapse into like darkness, it often seems to be the precursor to a breakthrough, almost to a different level or a different I'm not a quantum leap or something to a different level of energy. But it starts off with this like real dark, like, I've made no progress in my, spiritual journey. And I'm right back to groveling at my own feet. And Kathleen, you said something very interesting when I said that.
Yes, what I said is that Jung has an theory that and the phrase is regression in service of the self. And what Jung was referring to there is that sometimes when we're going forward in our present life and we're getting ready to take the next step, something comes our way and we want to do something different. We want to begin a relationship. We want to enter into a new creative partnership. We want to express ourselves differently. That if there is an energy that we need to be able to take that action in the present moment that's gotten locked up in the past, then we get pulled back into that old resentment or that old memory or that old feedback loop. So regression in service of the self, that you woke up with an old resentment, which immediately let me know you were pulled into something where some part of you is still stuck or caught in the past. And that when we can circle back to that and extend compassionate presence to ourselves and look to see what's stuck. Sometimes it's our emotion that's stuck. We felt really insecure or we felt shamed and we kind of froze there. Sometimes what is stuck is that we kind of lost our ability to think, because in that moment, we didn't quite know the ropes, so we deferred to someone else. So now we don't know the ropes and we get pulled back to that original place where my guess is now you would have the wherewithal to find the ropes, but then it went to someone else. But we've got to go back to that moment we gave it away, so to speak, in order to take it back.
That's really, it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking, right, there was a feeling of being stuck and unable to know where to reach out to, that there, and that as I said the word reach, I felt this emotional, like, but who to reach out to, not knowing where and how to reach in that will be reached back to me. And so I think I definitely, and we wanted to talk today about freedom, and then I brought up this experience, and you started talking about, right, we can lose our engagement in our own freedom by getting stuck. Now you just said go back. I think you said something like go back and do what? Like, what would we do and where would we go? And how would we know where to go?
Yeah.
And do we need a time machine, and what kind of time machine? And what is the time machine that we have already in our brains?
Well, the time machine that really lives in our psyche is our memory, and our memory that activates certain body sensations and certain affects or emotions. And then an onslaught of various images that we then create thoughts and beliefs out of. So the time machine is really our body, because in a moment's time, I can be getting ready to go on stage and let's just say I'm getting ready to play my harp publicly. And I'm a psychoanalyst, not a professional harpist, so that creates anxiety for me. Then I might all of a sudden be back feeling like I felt in the 4th grade when I did something, with my flute and my classmates laughed at me. That in that moment I get sucked back. And so what I then have to do in that case is, when I have the time and space, I probably won't be able to do it right before I go on stage. Right before I go on stage, I'm going to say to the 4th grader in me, you don't have to go out here and perform. You just go on back there and you play school. I loved to play school when I was a kid. I know, sounds crazy, but school and church, that's what I played. And as a side note, Jung says, whatever we could do for hours on end when we were a child has the roots of our life's work. So we can see that my roots of my life's work were there. But anyway, what I do then when I'm off stage and I have some space is, if I can get in a quiet meditative place and really go deep inside and connect with that experience and be with that 4th grader in me, if I want to think about it that way, and offer her some compassion and some acceptance and some reassurance. Because we all get caught where we feel guilt or shame. And none of us willingly want to feel guilt or shame, but yet it is pervasive when it kicks in. And often behind resentments is some sense of guilt. We feel we've done something wrong, or some sense of shame. And where we get caught in guilt or shame, we don't have freedom of choice in the present moment. In fact, where we get caught, and I mean caught, consumed, frozen in guilt or shame, we lose our self-agency. We lose our ability to think, to move, to choose. And we lose our ability to initiate action. So
I have a big question. I mean, so I'm thinking, when you started talking about this time machine, I was like, yeah. So we've got this time machine of our body, but it always goes back to like the wrong time. I mean, it always goes back to the time when like something crappy was happening. And, it's like, you go into the nodule, like, I'm going back to oh crap, I just ended up where not the saber-toothed tiger, but whatever's about to bite me. But I'm sure that's not true. I suspect that when we go back in that we're going back in that time machine all the time to get nourishment, to move us forward, to give us agency, to give us freedom, to have us move. And yet that we're aware of where it's stuck. Now, I don't know if that's kind of like, looking at a picture, like a moving picture, and you're just going to kind of see it moving. And then when if it froze, you'd see that, or like the skip in a record. You don't really, well, for people who remember records, old vinyl recordings, that when it would skip, that's when you started to notice it. That was when you had to go do something about it. So I'm assuming that, but I was just thinking about that as a time machine. So we would go back there, but let's talk about just that energy of regression, because my observation of myself is that and I've seen this over and over and over again, and I often just think like, oh my God, this is it. I'm going down the deep end now. And then the next day there's this breakthrough, and it doesn't seem to matter whether I throw a tantrum, whether I go to sleep, whether I go talk it out with somebody, or whether I just sort of, accept it. It's like, it's not a problem for me to solve. Mm-hmm. It is a place I am going through. And it's by the time I feel that regression, the transformation is already happening.
Yes, when we can consciously, meaning we are aware we're feeling it and we can name it, then yeah, we're 50% out of it, so to speak. Part of how I think about it is that there's states of consciousness. And a state of consciousness is like an energetic ball. And that energetic ball has body sensations, it has emotions, it has thoughts and ideas and feelings and desires and longings. And it just kind of has this impulse or this energy push. So, and what you're talking about is you wake up in a certain state of consciousness, and sometimes no matter what you do, it stays with you all day. You go to sleep, the next day you wake up in another state of consciousness. Something during the dream time happens and the state of consciousness shifts, the energy ball shifts. What I do find in my work, and I find in over the last 3 or 4 decades as I've worked with people, is the ability to see it, the ability to be compassionately present to it, not judging it, not shaming ourselves, just observing it with like, okay, that's what is today, is part of what does allow that state of consciousness to begin to get integrated. Because when something is integrated into the whole, if we think about, energy, balls of energy, if all of the balls of energy are connected to a center, and let's just say the center is our sense of self, our sense, not just ego self, but the ego with a sense of connection to the larger self, then at any given moment, when we need that energy, we can access it because it's connected to who we are. If that ball of energy is disconnected, i.e., we're not conscious of it, we disavow it, we reject it, we try to make it go away, then it's not connected to the center, which means we can't access it when we need it.
So we've got this ball, so our state of conscious, so are there different states of consciousness? Like there's these different balls, like I could reach out and like pull in, like I'm pulling in this?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are always, there are states of consciousness. Jung calls them complexes. And he says that the complex is the building block of psyche. And it's a feedback loop whose core is an affect, a strong emotional overtone around which our experiences of that emotion, what happens when we have that affect or someone else has that affect, gathers. And then there are all kinds of collective ideas about how you're supposed to respond, what you're supposed to do and not do that collect. And that's a simple way of describing these little balls of energy we're talking about.
So wait, is that where this idea of the collective unconscious, and is there also a collected conscious?
Oh, absolutely. Collective consciousness is what we see all the time in the media. I mean, the collective conscious are the ideas and the values that the media puts out there, that our leadership puts forth, that the leading thinkers of the day espouse. Those are what's conscious. The collective unconscious are all of the instinctive and archetypal energies that we all have access to because we were born human. They're just a part of our makeup.
And are those part of society? Is there a collected consciousness that's part of our individuality as well?
Absolutely. If I had close by a model of a diagram of Jung's model of the psyche, we all are shaped. Well, let me say it this way. Just imagine for a minute an oval, an egg. And that egg or oval is split into three sections. Okay. The bottom section is the collective unconscious. And that's all of our instinctive archetypal energies, the things that are reflexive, automatic, they just are there. Then the second tier is our personal unconscious. It's where those energies, those we have experiences of those instincts and archetypes that we then experience affects. We have interactions with the outside world. We have those experiences that attach. Out of that comes our ego, our conscious sense of self. The ego kind of lives right on the edge of the second tier and the top tier. The top tier being conscious, the conscious self. So the ego, by definition in psychology, is that sense of self we have consciously. You can't define ego without the word conscious, meaning something we are aware of. And then in that top tier, there's the ego. Then there's our persona, the roles we play, the mask we put on. Then there's collective consciousness.
Wait a minute, how many different stripes? So at the bottom is collective unconsciousness. Then there's, what was that?
Personal unconscious.
Personal unconscious. And then there's three more.
And then there's consciousness. In the realm of consciousness, there's the ego, the persona, and then the collective consciousness.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. So,
Yeah.
All right. I have two questions. So first of all, I often think of myself as a node. I don't know why. Like I always thought of myself like, here's this like humanity, and then I'm just like a node that just kind of pops up in that humanity. And so when you say that, I think of the, like if I was a mushroom, and all the mushroomness is like down on the bottom, and then there's me, my mushroom, and then there's the stalk of me, and then there's the top of me or whatever. So this kind of reminds me of that the collective unconsciousness is like all mushroomness, and which I think there's like whatever, not a mushroomologist, and then and then there's my ego and who I am. So there's that idea of being a node. And the other question is, where does my spiritual connection fit? Like, what is my spiritual connection? What is it? And where is it? And what is it connected? Where is it connected in that model?
In Jung's model, so the other psychic structure that Jung identified with is the self with a capital S. So in Jungian psychology, we make a distinction with the self with a little s, which is our ego consciousness, and the self with a capital S, which is the totality of our psyche soul. And so one way I sometimes depict this when I try to make it two-dimensional in a diagram is I will have the self with a capital S both holding the entire oval as well as the center point of the entire oval. So when we talk about regression and service of the self, I want to clarify, because David put in a comment, that's an interesting concept. We are talking about that the regression serves the total, the largesse of ourself, the self with a capital S. And when our little s self can consciously relate to what that regression, that pullback into resentment, or that reliving of a trauma, or reenactment, we see ourselves doing the same thing again. When we can, with our little s self, consciously say, okay, what's caught there that I need? Then we consciously can harvest the gifts that the larger self wants us to have. I mean, integration is the natural thrust, if we believe Jung and some of the evolution, that integration is what nature wants, if we believe that, and Jung believed that. So,
I have two things. First of all, the picture that you started to draw of, that the larger self is both outside and in. I mean, if you're working in multiple dimensions, then that they can be the same thing. I mean, so that makes sense. So is it important to know? Like, let's say I can feel that I'm in a period of regression. I'm experiencing it. Now I'm familiar with it. Do I need to know the specifics of where I got caught in order to release and integrate it?
Not necessarily. Jung made a comment when he was talking about using active imagination when these energies are caught, that it's not important that we know why the energy shifts, but it's only important that it shifts. So sometimes I will say to my analysis, it doesn't matter what but we know this is reality now. What is it that's needed to get you back to the present? Sometimes our psyche does want us to know the specific. And how do we know? I think the way we know is if we keep getting pulled into the past. So when my analysts come into me and say, you've heard me say this is the 100th time, I say, well, I'm always listening as if it's the first time I'm hearing it, and to hear what still wants to be heard, what still wants to be known. And so I think that, again, the compassionate presence, and in order to really have freedom, is we have to accept if we keep getting caught in something and we throw our hands up and say, well, I know that's because of blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Well, there's still something we don't know if we're caught that wants to be known. And so, that's when doing some stream of consciousness journaling, that's when doing an active imagination, that's when talking to, your therapist or a trusted friend or, a confidant can be helpful to see what is it that's there that I'm missing.
As you're speaking and as I'm thinking about this specific event, resentment that I have or frustration or whatever it is, I'm realizing that there's things that I know and that I'm just not taking action on. And as you were speaking and I was thinking about getting stuck, something that's stuck in the past or something that's stuck. I was just thinking about a knot. You can either go back and you can see it and you can untie it. But sometimes just by the action and the movement, not necessarily the pulling, but the action and the movement, that can untangle something and become untangled through other actions or through movement itself.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking that often when I'm afraid to take action is when I am stucking myself.
Yeah. And we all get stuck. And I think, again, I really I'm an advocate for compassion, self-compassion. We all get stuck. It's part of, inertia is just a gift and a curse. I mean, if it wasn't for inertia, we wouldn't be able to sit here and talk, because we can sit here and talk because our bodies operate because of the law of inertia. Our heart has a rhythm it goes in, our breathing. So psychically, we also need these kind of patterns that can sometimes be ruts. So stuckness is both a blessing and a curse. And the other thing I think that's important to remember, where we get pulled into the past, we did the best we could do at that moment in time. And I know sometimes people will say to me, well, no, I didn't because I knew I should have. I said, well, you might have known it intellectually, but if you could have done something different energetically, you would have. And I believe that. Not everybody believes that, but I believe that.
Well, and I'm thinking about inaction, and that we often think it's all is lost. And I also realize that often we don't take action. I'm just talking about myself. I don't take action, and I hear in colleagues and students and stuff like that they're afraid because of being perfectionistic. I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. And I even said something like that to you before we started. And yet I have experienced over and over again, yet I'm just saying it aloud to myself right now, that action, once you take action, if it's wrong, then you can shift. Even we often feel that we can't. It often surprises us. Like I see people, play a wrong note. And by the way, I forgot to say that this is called Jung and Harp, because even though Kathleen is a Jungian psychoanalyst and I'm a harp and I'm a composer, we're both play the harp, Jung and Harp. So that's how we met. So I hear that the big difference between people who are able to play fluently and people who are not playing fluently in music, and I'm thinking now in life, is assessing and stopping and trying to fix something that's wrong rather than moving forward and catching it sort of in the next chorus. And I think that I get it in my head that there is no next chorus. This is it. And I better get this chorus right. And I think of, and I think that if I could believe that one thing, that no matter what happens, there's another chorus and I can try it again and I can try to resolve that, which doesn't mean that I don't want to plan and prepare, because planning and preparing is one of the greatest things you can do in order to have freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about it when we were talking yesterday by text about the topic and the idea of freedom, that in some ways I'm having converging thoughts, so let me just say that. I'm not in a linear headspace at the moment. I'm in one of these kind of branching out.
Right, yeah.
So the first thing I want to say is, one of the things that you have said many times in Hip Harp Academy is that when you went to classical music training, I might not have the memory exactly right, so I apologize. When you would practice, after you practiced a difficult piece, at the end, you would then just let yourself play it as if you could play it, making the gestures, the movements, and then you didn't worry about the right notes.
Right.
That has been so helpful to me, because it allowed me to realize that there is freedom of expression. Freedom of expression, and I think this is true in music and energetically and relationally and with ourselves, means we have to be playful, and we have to let ourselves do what the 12-step program say: act as if until you can, fake it till you make it. And so that whole idea of playing and of, acting as if, even when we know we're getting, quote, wrong notes, has been really helpful to me. And now the other little branches have just disappeared.
Let me jump in there, and which is, I want to say that when I did that, I was alone. And I do remember somebody walking in one time while I was doing it and being like, "What the hell are you playing?" And I would be like, "I'm playing the Ravel's Introduction Allegro. You would never know it. I'm not playing one right note, but I'm playing the piece."
Yeah.
And I love that. And I'm glad you reminded me of that, because I think I can use that again in my own, in getting freedom. And I think I worry about doing that when there's other people involved who will have no idea what I'm doing. So yeah. I guess there are things that we can use, and I want to remind myself that we're talking about freedom, which is movement, and regression, which is seeming to be going back.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, and I know I'm in the middle of a sentence, but I'm going to go back, because I realize that when you play jazz, you go in a circle. You go, you get to the end of the piece, and there is literally a sign there that says, "Go back." And then there's a sign here that says, "Go back to here." And you go back there and you keep going through it. And as you get more and more freedom, the freedom is that you're going to go back, you catch what you can, and then you catch more the next time. So I'm thinking there's something about regression, that when we feel like we're regressing, that's giving us another chance.
I love that. And, because part of what does happen is those feedback loops, those energy centers that do tend to keep kicking back in. Every time we go back through it, if we go back consciously, something changes and we have more freedom, just like with the jazz and the improv. Every time you go through it, there's an opportunity, there's a different opportunity, freedom to create something different. And if we look at the recurrence, the regression into our resentments or our pains or our traumas, as this is an opportunity for me to do something differently there, to play a different song with it. And I know for me, one of my fears, I laugh. I'm really a medieval hermit healer woman in the woods. That's how I want to live. But here I am now, much more public. And whenever I do something that's a really big step out there in the world for me, like a really big expansion, I will find myself then having this wave of anxiety once I do it, and all these kind of catastrophic thoughts. And I've just kind of learned when it comes, I say, oh yeah, of course you're coming now. Here you are. and it has far less power. It dissipates so much more quickly. And I just know it's part of the lay of my psyche, so to speak. It's part of the lay of the land of my energetic field. And okay, there's that place in me that was scared, that goes back to being the little girl who was the only kid in the class who didn't have an indoor bathroom at home. All right, so, but I'm not that now. That's not where I am. And so it's just interesting, that whole circling back. And again, when we understand this idea of regression and service of the self to have greater freedom in the moment, it is like the jazz lead sheet, and you go back and you keep circling back. But every time you circle back, there's an opportunity to have greater freedom of expression.
Right. And I realized as you were speaking that if we go back trying to fix it, we end up in almost like a sand trap, or like, we just keep going around and around and around.
Right.
But if we go back, allowing a new experience, doing something different. And it's interesting because in jazz, especially when I'm teaching jazz and students are learning to be melodic, to improvise melodically, I often give them fence posts, so that they can go from place to place, so they don't get stuck on this one place, and then give them different ideas each time you go back through the fence posts. Do something different with it. Like the first time, just go from one fence post to the next. The second time, circle around, go in the opposite direction, and then come back. The third time, make a little embellishment on each fence post. So you start to create movement, and you start to create, and it's very practical. And eventually it will lead to a freedom. But sometimes I think my experience is I can't just, hey, be free. I literally have to practice and utilize ideas to help me experience and engage with freedom and bring freedom into what I'm doing, so that I don't stay back in that regression, but I'm actually using ideas with that regression to help me get a greater freedom when I come to the other side of it. So that's.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I'm thinking you just gave us kind of a great segue to kind of summarize what we've been talking about today, is that if I were going to offer the fence post, when you get pulled back into that the first idea or tool to use is compassionate acceptance, that you set aside the judgment and criticism, and you just breathe and you say, okay, that is. The second thing I would say that is a way to improv with it is to then dialogue with it, talk to it, ask it what it wants you to know, ask it what it needs so that it no longer has a power to hurt you. Ask what it needs to feel nourished and to be integrated. So the second thing would be to do an active imagination, dialogue with it. And then the third thing is to take an action that will literally shift your physical feeling and emotional state of consciousness.
I'm writing these into the chat.
Yeah, I see that. That's terrific.
So how would I remember?
The third thing is to take a physical action that will literally shift your body and emotional state of consciousness. So this is why, for instance, walking is such a great tool, and there's walking meditation. People naturally pace when they're worried or trying to problem solve because the movement shifts something in the body energetically. So compassionate acceptance, dialogue, and then an action that will shift the body state of consciousness. then you can come back and start the three again. So
wow, this is really interesting. So, put your glasses on. So compassionate acceptance. Wow, I spelled these all wrong. Compassionate acceptance, im, active imagination to dialogue with the fear, and then take a physical action.
yeah,
I just want to see. So acceptance, imagination, acceptance within ourselves, connected, some kind of using our imagination to connect and have a relationship with that fear, and then a physical action that literally will just create movement
yes,
of some sort. And that's really interesting. And I'm realizing that physical action can also be teaching my psyche or my spirit or whatever about what it means to physically move from one place to another.
yes, yes, yeah, yeah. When this, I don't want to get, but I'll reiterate, when we get pulled back into an old state of consciousness where we freeze, the fight, flight, or freeze mode, then we lose our capacity to access the whole of who we are and all of the possible resources. So sometimes the physical action, like going out for a walk, for me, it's often a swim. Sometimes it's just going outside and touching my favorite tree and leaning against it, or doing a receptive pose to the sun energy. Sometimes we have to shift the physical state in order for the emotional and mental state to get unstuck. And so the body and the mind and they inform each other. So, and with the harp, of course, we're always doing our practice of technique, and we put that physical in there, so we have it. We know the hand shapes. We know what it feels like. And we dialogue with, having the chord progressions in our mind or whatever. And we sit down with that presence, that compassionate acceptance to what is, to be in the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because lately I've been using music to actively accept and thank, like, thank you for in this moment I have all I need. Thank you for this drop of rain. Thank you for these fingers on these strings. Thank you for these feet upon this ground. To just really to connect myself in that acceptance, and even thank you for this problem that takes me back, in which I get to experience regression. to just actually engage with that, because do I think I can control my way out of it? I can't. I can't. It reminds me, ever since I was a kid, when I used to go into the shoe stores and they gave you the little thing, the finger trap, and the only way to untrap your fingers was to push in instead of trying to pull out. And I always thought of that as a beautiful metaphor for acceptance, and that is what gives us freedom within that. So we're in that regression, so that we can move through it and move out of it.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, Kathleen, thank you. And thank you for everybody who's listening for another wonderful conversation that comes out of one question, or even one word or two words together. Yeah. I just love this dialogue, and I'm really looking forward to the next time. And thank you for the comments. And I always love going back and reading comments afterwards.
Terrific. It's been great. Yeah.
And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. We're back. Okay.
Bye-bye.